All right. So thank you everyone for joining the second panel of the day. Hopefully many of you have been on to listen to the AI panel a little bit earlier. There were some very interesting insights associated with that session. This conversation today is really a little bit different. Um, we may touch on some issues, but it's really about a risk manager session with Kiko Harvey, who's the Associate Senior Vice President of Audit Services and an adjunct professor in the Marshall Business School at USC. We've prepared this as essentially a roundtable discussion. And what we will do is bring up some slides that will sit in the background to inform the conversation. With me also is Jasmine Klein, who is with Marsh. And I'll have Kiko introduce herself at this point around her background and where she's been. She's got an extraordinary experience, both internationally and domestically. I've had her in one of my classes at USC to talk about what she did to help Delta Airlines purchase a fuel operation. So she's got a varied background. So Kiko, just a few minutes on your background and what you've been doing.
Sure. I'm Kiko Harvey. It's nice to meet you all. I am the Associate Senior Vice President of Audit Services at the University of Southern California. It is my I was an alumni there. I got my undergraduate degree in accounting and my master's of accounting here at the school. I am the daughter of an alumni, and my daughter also went to USC, so Trojan all the way through. And happy to be back. I've been here since 2021. And I managed internal audit for both the university as well as the USC health system. So we do own 4 hospitals and about 90 ambulatory care centers. So it is a big system. Um, Prior to coming to USC, I was the Inspector General of the World Food Program of the United Nations. It is the largest humanitarian operation in the world. It does hire the other NGOs like the Red Cross and other really big Save the Children, those types of NGOs that you've heard of. You probably have not heard of the World Food Program unless you live in Africa, the Middle East, or a nation that is a developing nation. So, but again, as Inspector General, I ran internal audit as well as all the investigations of sexual harassment, sexual exploitation and abuse, harassment and abuse of power, and those types of things. So it was a wild job. I traveled extensively in developing nations and lots of stories, but I was there during COVID. So again, very, very unique role. Loved it. Wish I could have done it longer, but my husband said, get back to the United States. I was living in Rome, and so I ended up at USC. Prior to that, I ran enterprise risk management as well as internal audit as the vice president of corporate audit and enterprise risk management at Delta Airlines. I did that for about 7.5 years. Right after the merger with Northwest Airlines. And that was, again, as Ward said, we did buy an oil refinery at the time as a bit of a hedge. And that was a very interesting role. Prior to that, I was the vice president of corporate audit at at Starbucks Coffee Company, where I also did dabble in enterprise risk management there as well. Did that role for almost 12 years, actually. I started out running their accounting operations for retail as well as licensed accounting. I joined Starbucks when they had just been public for about 4 years. So a fascinating role. Got to work under Howard Schultz and know all the old timers there. Prior to that, I worked for PepsiCo restaurant groups for the Taco Bell Corporation, and before that, I was almost 8 years with Price Waterhouse. So that's my career. It's been wild. I like to work for super brands, as you can tell, and had some very interesting stories. I'm now an adjunct professor in the Arkley Risk Institute at USC. I teach graduate students, MBA and Masters of Accounting students. I teach advanced enterprise risk management, and it is the only graduate program or graduate course offered under for risk management right now. I think we're expanding that, and it's the first time it's been offered, and it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, Kiko and I teach at the same time, and our classrooms are right next to each other. So it's kind of fun. The difference, though, is that Kiko brings treats and snacks to her students. My undergraduates get none of that. So it's great. So Jasmine, just a couple of seconds on your background, and then please bring up the slides.
Yeah, sure. So, hi everyone. I'm Jasmine Klein. I'm an alumni of USC and was part of the Arkley Institute for Risk Management before it was the Arkley Institute for Risk Management. So, I was lucky enough to learn from Professor Ching and really looking forward to the discussion with Kiko. So, with that, I will share my screen here.
Thank you. So as the screens comes up, really what we're doing is I will set up this conversation as soon as the screen. There we go. All right. So if you advance to the next slide, what we're really going to be talking about are three basic things. The first is sort of the state of the condition in academia from a risk management point of view and sort of the risk management process at USC with Kiko commenting on that. And let's mind you, she has an enterprise risk management perspective. So it's going to be slightly different than just insurance. It's going to have a number of, hazard, operational, market, reputational kinds of risk issues. In the second section, we'll be talking about designing and deploying enterprise risk management approach. I'd like Kiko's got some very, very interesting insights there, as well as perhaps commenting on the elements of her class. And then thirdly, what are the future trends that we're seeing facing universities when it comes in the space? All of you know that universities have been sort of in the crosshairs of a lot of very interesting risk management issues for quite some time. All you have to do is go back to last year's commencements around the country with all of the protests that have taken place and all the disruption on campus to see the various dimensions of risk and risk management on campus, not to mention what happens with athletics, what happens with medical schools, what happens with all of the other issues that happen basically on campus. So if we go to the next slide, and I'll invite Kiko to join in, essentially what we're seeing is that large universities have, for all intents and purposes, they're challenged to navigate the insurance markets, leading to questions of value regarding their approach to risk management and risk solutions. Now, it's interesting that if you look at the insurance marketplace, the larger elite institutions have a slightly different experience in the marketplace than the second, third tier universities and the community colleges. There is just a different kind of perspective in the marketplace with respect to where these colleges are and how they run their risk management program. Clearly, what we're seeing is the emergence and acceleration of disruptive risks, and they're difficult to analyze. So, for example, universities are doing a significant amount of work in the area of AI and generative AI, as well as synthetic data. How that moves from the university setting into a commercial setting, for example, is very difficult to, first of all, measure and to price from a risk financing point of view. And certainly, Kiko, you can comment on this. What do you do from an enterprise risk management point of view? Universities have also been very slow to adapt proactive, innovative new enterprise risk management solutions. And some of this in response to social inflation, economic risk trends, staffing issues, athletic injury, SAM, cyber, and other sorts of reputational risk questions. And then really university risk managements are doing more with kind of doing with less. We don't see very, very large risk management departments. We don't see them organized in such a way that kind of calibrates to where the university risk management structures generally need them to go. So with that sort of as backdrop, and it's not meant to be pessimistic in any sort of way, risk management on university campuses are very robust in many ways because they have to. There are dynamic environments and they have to focus on all of that. So Kiko, first of all, how do you recognize and how do you think USC is organized from a risk management point of view?
Well, first I'll start with kind of setting up, what are universities like? So universities are for the most part old. Harvard's really old. USC is almost 150 years old. And it's hard for higher education to get a new mindset. And we kind of operate the same way we used to operate. We're used to kind of an in-person environment. We've got lovely campuses, and we expect to kind of operate the way we've always operated forever. And unfortunately, that's just not going to happen. It costs almost $100,000 a year to send a student to USC when you include room and board. So that's $400,000 a year for an undergraduate student at a private university. And almost all the private universities are about the same. We may be a little bit on the higher end, but still, we're not the highest, by the way. So that's a lot of money. And that's every degree, and it's all equal. And I kind of, I'm going to say right here that maybe that model isn't going to stay the same all the time. Is an engineering degree worth the same as maybe an education degree? I don't know. But that's the model that we operate. And there's disruptive change to that. Google might create their own universities. They're starting to hire a lot of our top professors, or at least they're tugging at them, right? And so what's going to happen if all of a sudden Google decides that they don't really care about a college education? They're going to start their own universities, and they're going to train directly and then hire those people directly at high salaries. And so now we lose all those students. What happens to a university then? So we have to start worrying about, is our model going to hang together forever? Is the value of a college education, are we teaching our students the right things for the future jobs that are there? So that's one type of an enterprise risk that we now need to face. Online is another one. Everybody comes to us and we teach in front of them. Is that the future? Is that the way that everybody wants to learn? We charge the same for our online degrees as we do for our in-person. Is that the right model? That's not the model that everybody else follows, but that's a model that a lot of the elite universities follow. But is that the right pricing? So there's just a lot of things that are facing us today. And not to mention, the risks that are insurance type risks. And so there's a lot coming at us. And then you look at the things that we've already faced. When I was at the UN, I was watching the Varsity Blues situation, the Tyndall, the sexual harassment situation where USC ended up paying $1.1 billion. That's a big amount of money even for a university like us. And all of the corrections and new things that we had to do to stop that from ever happening again. And those are, and you look at what's happening in athletics. And not only the things that insurers worry about, like brain injuries and safety of the students, but then you look at the future of NIL, and whether or not students are going to be employees, and and of course we've got the settlement with the former players that has just now. They've come up with some sort of a calculation is how we're going to pay out the media rights to the past players. And now we've got former players not in that pool who want to sue us for other things, for their media rights that are not in the group. And then like Reggie Bush. And then you've got how you're going to distribute the rights going forward to the existing players, as well as what do you do with Title IX and athletes that are not on the field and not generating media, but that are female athletes and they want their money too. And how does that change the economics of student athletes and sports? And what do you do with the rowing team? And they're not generating any revenues. And there's a lot going on. And there's a lot of change facing universities that are hundreds of years old, and with administrations that aren't used to dealing with these things. And so those are the types of things that we're facing today that maybe 10 years ago we didn't even think about. And then you've got things like pandemics and COVID, and you've got encampments and graffiti, and you've got broken windows, and you've got people, blocking the entrance to your schools and disrupting operations, and you've got insurers that don't want to insure you anymore, and captive insurance companies that you've got to set up because you can't get certain kinds of insurance anymore. So there's a lot going on. And it's an exciting time to help with enterprise risk management, which is what I do for the university. But it's also a lot of drama. And then of course, you've got your AI generated cyber attacks and research, and there's a lot.
Yeah, I mean the issue with USC is that the risk management department is for the most part traditionally organized. So it's property, it's casualty, it's fiduciary coverages. There's a separate focus on the medical school, but their philosophy has been to a large degree in the past risk transfer. So to take the frequency and the severity, do the calculations, walk yourself into market, and place that risk and transfer that risk elsewhere, particularly in the area of some of the casualty lines and on the property side with earthquake. Today, though, those lines of coverage don't necessarily align with or calibrate well with some of the things that are happening on campus. And so USC did develop a captive insurance company and is in the process of looking at calculating the efficient trade between retention and transfer, but it's still pretty blocky and pretty, chunky in terms of the kinds of things that all covers. The question is going to be, as you continue to evolve the enterprise risk management process, is how do you fine tune that? What data do you need to use to help either inform the self-insurance portion of this or inform the marketplace about what's coming up next? Because the whole athletic side of it is topsy-turvy right now. So those are really sort of the standard risks that are there. But when you're looking at the university from an enterprise risk management point of view, how do you detect and analyze emerging risks? I mean, you mentioned a few right there, but how do you continue to detect and measure those emerging risks?
Well, universities by their nature, because of are federated environments. They're not a centralized environment. I don't think there's any, maybe smaller universities might be able to be successful this way, but most universities are separated and segregated into different schools with different deans. That results in a federated or a decentralized model. And so it makes it even harder because then you're siloed. So risks kind of go up through the deans and the departments, the major departments. So you've got to have excellent communications, and you've got to have a system that escalates risk through the decentralized process up through more of a kind of a basket, or to be able to escalate and catch the risk through the provost's office, and then up through a kind of a central body or an enterprise risk group. We do have that governance process at USC, and which is nice. And you've got to train your executive leaders to identify, understand, and then raise those risks. We kind of do it through risk dashboards, and I distribute the dashboards. And we've got a lot of top risk dashboards, but I engage the provost and the senior VP of health in reviewing those dashboards. And so, that process, and I'm all over the campus all the time doing audits and meeting with all the senior leaders on a regular basis. So I can surface a lot and get it onto the dashboards for conversation. So I don't think we're missing a lot of big things, but we can get those conversations going. And we're pretty tuned in with the other universities, risk departments. So I don't think we're missing big risks that are facing higher education as a whole. I think if there's something that happened at USC that didn't surface from the bottom up, that wasn't regulatory. Like if it's regulatory, it's surfacing up. But if something happened and somebody didn't raise it in a lab or something like that, that's a little bit tougher. But if it's a big event, I think, a lawsuit or something like that, we're not going to miss that.
Yeah, the large events are visible. The
Yeah.
large events develop claims. The large events develop lawsuits.
Yeah.
But as you're developing these risk registers, how do you discriminate between something that's material to the organization and something that's anecdotal, something that's, it may surface in a department, it may be an emerging risk issue, but you can't really define it very clearly. You can't see it moving over time. Maybe you're not in a position to measure it economically. How do you discriminate between noise and the actual signal with respect to risks that are showing up in your risk registers? Is
Yeah,
there a criteria you're using?
our risk registers do not discriminate by materiality.
Okay.
So we have as many risks as we want to put in our risk registers. Our what defines a risk in our risk register or our risk universe is whether or not it has a control against it
Okay.
and whether or not somebody is controlling that risk.
Right.
So that's what plops it on the risk register.
Right.
So we have a lot of things like one of our risks are scooter safety.
Right.
Like, is somebody going to get hit by a scooter on campus? That's a pretty minuscule risk, right? I mean, it's bad if somebody gets hit by a scooter,
Mhm.
but somebody wanted that very badly on on the risk register, so we're like, okay, we'll put it on there. I mean, somebody striped a little lane for scooters, so that they ride in a little lane, so nobody goes in the lane, so that pedestrians go get hit by the power scooters. But so we've added. So we don't have a lot of materiality standards for what people put on the risk registers. As long as somebody is responsible for controlling that risk, we're going to add it. It's not going to get to the enterprise risk level. It's
Right.
just too minor.
Right. It's sitting there. So is the framework you're using the COSO framework?
It
Or
is.
okay,
Yeah,
so
we are using the COSO framework loosely generated. We're using risk identification, risk monitoring, and the scoring of risks and all of that. So yes, we're using the concepts under the COSA risk management framework.
right. And are we requiring our vendors and our partners to also have, no, we're not requiring them to have some sort of enterprise risk management plan.
No, we're not. We do a lot on the IT side with our third parties, though. From a security standpoint, they're not on the ERM COSO risk framework. They have to abide by IT standards,
Mhm.
and those are loosely, I would say, NIST. But
Okay. Okay.
I wouldn't say that we're requiring them to adopt NIST.
Okay.
Uh, uh, that's going a little overboard.
Right.
But we require them to have some pretty robust IT standards. We are starting to have to go there because we are we
Right.
receive federal grants, and so we're under CMMC. And so we're starting to need to have our third party contractors, especially in the security end, have to be a lot more. That third party management of risk is a lot more robust now than it used to be.
What is the escalation process? So risks are bubbling up or they're sitting on the register, they're being talked about. And how do they escalate to the enterprise level? And who owns it at the end of the day?
Well, the owners are usually, it's going to be somebody on this, like the senior leadership team, or we call it the presidential senior leadership team. So the PSLT, those direct reports of Carol Folt, our president.
Mhm.
So, and that all kind of it's all divided into its natural functional bucket. So administration, you've got the provost that does all the academics, you've got the research, you've got the health system. So it kind of it divides up as you would expect under the major functional roles, like any corporation would as well. And so that's usually going to be the ownership, and that's how it would bubble up.
And is there a report that's done that President Volt will see? And does she have to sign off on anything? Do the trustees have an interest in any of this?
Well, the trustees receive an update on their risk dashboards by subcommittee.
Hmm.
So all of our top risks have been, I would say, assigned to the appropriate subcommittee for ownership, but most of them are falling with the audit committee.
Okay. And so the final place where the report sits and gets discussed and to some degree signed off on is really in the audit committee level.
There's not a report.
Okay.
There's dashboards.
Okay.
And there's dashboard updates. So there's not like we don't write a report on risk. There's no chief risk officer. So there's not a report on risk.
Right.
There's audits that are done. In all of our audits are key, all of our audits cross-reference one of the top risks.
Right.
And so,
and yeah, because it's a private university, you're not necessarily generating things like a 10K. So you're not really discussing the risks in that kind of context.
No.
But is that discussed internally? Is there a process for that?
Yeah.
Those risks to be talked about and discussed and budgets put to them and responsibilities put to them?
I wouldn't say the budgets are put to them. We are not using enterprise risk management as a cost allocation tool.
Okay.
So I would say, though, that when it comes to things like cybersecurity and those types of risks, there's there's never adequate money you put aside for cybersecurity. You can always use more. But I would say that if there's a significant risk and a significant need, it's going to get into the budget allocation, but we're not using ERM as a catalyst for the budget because we don't generally need to do that.
Right. So Jasmine, if you go to the next slide, some of this discussion shows up on this next slide. I'm curious though, how do you share information with other universities? Who would be the peer group for USC?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So it's kind of funny. So I was invited by invitation, by the way. And we've capped it at 30 members. I am in something called HEAP, which is the Higher Education Enterprise Risk Management Practitioners Group. It is also affectionately known as the Ivy +5, which doesn't make sense because there's not 30 when you add Ivy +5. It's a very elite group, as you can imagine. It's the Ivy League schools, and then they allowed 5, which is not 5. Of us to join them, and it's a bit snooty. Oh wait, this is being taped. But it's, as you can imagine, it's Harvard, Stanford, it's Harvard and Stanford, but Harvard, Princeton, Cornell, all of the Ivy League schools. And then they've let Stanford and USC join, luckily. But it also has Northwestern, and Oregon has joined recently. And we've let University of Chicago join, and so there's Ohio State has joined. So there's a number of Big Ten schools in there. For some reason, we don't have like Texas schools, or we don't have anybody from the South or Southeast in there. We do need to invite some of them, but it's people who have a sustainable. Duke is very active in it. But sustainable and well thought out enterprise risk management. We do actually interview new schools to join our group, and we put them through the ringer to make sure that they have a credible ERM program, and that they will be willing to share their best practices, and that we think their best practices are worth sharing. So again, as you can imagine, it's a bit MIT's in there as well. But it is a great group of leaders in ERM, and I've learned a lot from them. I think I've learned more than they've learned from me. But I beg, borrow, and steal all their stuff, and their Brown is in there as well, and they just have some really amazing thought leadership. And so we learn from each other, but it's a great source of information. And, it's a great group because they'll ping information, they'll ping new emerging risks that they've run across or stumbled across, and they'll ask our opinion. And it's very active. We probably are in email communications with each other maybe once every other week. We have in-person meetings annually, and we have virtual meetings every annually as well. So every 6 months we're getting together, but again, informally all the time.
All right. So as you look across the that universe of potential peers, interesting that some of the schools that have risk management programs may not be there. Is Wisconsin in there, for example? Yeah, you said
Not yet.
no. Yeah, you said no Southern schools. So Georgia's not in there. Florida
I
State's
don't
not
think
there.
I don't think Georgia has a ERM program. I'm not
Uh,
sure.
Interesting, because they've got a very strong insurance program
Yeah.
in their undergraduate program. But anyway, the question is, how are we doing? As you look at the others, are you seeing us living in the first, second, third, fourth quartile? How do we perform?
USC?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, it's under me. Of course, we're doing great.
Of course.
No,
Of course.
actually the Cal State system is really amazing. And of course that's a system, and they roll up through a central process,
Right.
but they're very advanced.
Right.
And I would say, Duke is very, very advanced. They're heavy on research.
Mm,
Um, and so they're very focused on risk related to research. And so I get a lot of information from the Duke ERM program. Harvard and MIT together. They're
yeah.
kind of joined at the hip. Um, have a good program. The only thing I would say where the groups are not as advanced, where maybe USC has taken a step ahead of them, is the other ERM programs are very good about sharing with their board of trustees the listing of their top risks, but they do stop there. Where
Mm,
USC shares the listing of the top risks as well as the risk triggers, or which Duke does do. But then we also share the mitigating actions that management is taking. Most of the other universities will stop, and they'll show the top risks, but they won't show the mitigating actions. And I'm not entirely sure why.
mhm.
Um,
Okay.
but we do. I mean, we show the whole.
Right,
Everything.
right. All right.
Um,
So, Jasmine, if you go to the next slide, there's sort of the trends going forward. Um, so these are things that you've identified as being really important to enterprise risk management at the university level. Could you talk this through? So it shows committed leadership, commitment to ERM, strong knowledge of risk, insurance, strategic risk management, strong data and analytics tools, robust risk scanning capabilities. Talk about what that means for you at USC.
is that for Jasmine or for me?
Nope, for you, Kiko, sorry.
Oh, well, I think, if you do not have your president's support for ERM in a big way, it will flounder. And because the president is the big name they run everything at a university. And so if you get kind of a sideways glance from the president, despite what the board of trustees wants to do, it is not going anywhere. And so it's been a lot of work to get the president behind ERM. She is very committed to ERM, but she has a lot on her plate.
Yeah.
And so she's always been very generous with her time, but it is hard to get on her calendar, especially in a routine, every year you need to do this. And it is a lot because we've had encampments. We've had, there's just a lot. We canceled commencement last year. We had COVID, there's a lot. And so even though a lot of these things are also on our risk, on our and, and part of our top risks, it's it's hard to it's hard to establish a routine, regular timing. So what I've done instead is I've gone through her chief of staff because that is the person who meets with her the most frequently. And I found it's an easier route than it is to try to get a regular routine meeting because those meetings are just easily canceled, easily moved, and it's just hard to do.
Right.
So,
Right.
but as far as support goes, there's a lot of support. Commitment to ERM, we get that from our board. Our board of trustees is very, there's a lot of, you don't want to necessarily drown your board with detail because these risk registers are not written in a positive light, right? And so a lot of times you're like, ooh, is it a good idea to share all your dirty laundry or your concerns with your board of trustees? These are your big donors and these are your alumni, your key alumni, but I think they're also your board. And so we've done that, and I think they've really appreciated that. The feedback has been it has been fantastic. And they thirst for more.
Mhm.
And they're not afraid of it. And they haven't done what we were afraid they might do, which is, kind of reach over the line and try to fix. And they've been very good and stayed in their lane, and they know their role as governance and oversight. And so I think their commitment to ERM has always been consistent. And they understand their role, and so that's been great. Um, and I think, we're teaching people to be more risk aware. We're never going to get it 100% right. But I think we've made a lot. The university has had a lot of setbacks, and our brand has taken a hit. Media doesn't like us a lot of times, and of course we've gotten in our own way. But the culture is strong. The Trojan family is very strong, stronger than a lot of alumni groups in other universities. And so just got to get that football team to win a few games. Not by, the way we've losing them by just this much. But I think we have the foundation for a very strong ERM program. So we just have to keep at it and not get fatigued. I
Right.
don't know that it belongs under audit. That's the only issue, but I don't have a place to hand it off. So until I
Hmm.
find a place to hand it off, and I know that it's actually going to not just fail when I hand it off, I'm going to keep it under me until I can set it off properly. Second line of defense does not belong under the third line of defense. I just got to get it someplace, and I right now I can't.
Right. And obviously strong knowledge of risk, insurance, strategic risk management, et cetera, is important. Curious there. Is is the work that you're doing informing the insurance placements? Is that trickling over? Okay, so there's
No, and that's
not
the
yet.
shame. We're really disjointed in that way. I have included them in the risk steering committee, both our president of the captive and our traditional insurance. And they're very great. They attend, but their view is, like you said, risk transfer, and their focus has not been on the enterprise risk discussions. It's been on what's insurable.
Okay.
So when we start talking strategic and brand and
In,
that
intangible risks. Yeah.
yeah, their
Yeah.
focus continues to go back to what's insurable.
Okay.
And
Right.
so it's been hard to pull out a different view.
If you compare us with other universities, are we using similar, different uh, data analytics tools when you look at the enterprise risk issue?
I wouldn't say I'm using a lot of data analytics tools at all.
Okay.
Um, Not for what I'm doing.
Okay.
Um, uh,
You're testing for controls.
no, I mean, we don't, when we use in audit, we use a ton of data analytics tools,
Yeah.
but not in this more operational. This is a very qualitative, not quantitative risk
Okay.
management approach. Um, I would say that's because the data, universities have a lot of data, but what data do you think we would want to be looking for?
Right. Right. I mean,
I mean, we
in
have tons of cybersecurity data. I mean,
right.
I could look at cybersecurity data all day long and backward, but I've got the cybersecurity, the CISO group is looking at it all the time.
Right.
I don't have to look at it. I know we're
Right.
being attacked
Right. No, absolutely. And
thousands of times a day or a minute. I know that.
right. 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 Um, Anything else on the scanning capabilities? Again, comparing us with somebody else, particularly somebody like Duke, are they doing something different in the risk scanning space? No, we're doing essentially the same thing they're doing.
We are all doing the same thing. I would say USC is where USC is much better than any other university, much better. And they are learning from us. In fact, we're doing a lot of speaking to the other universities as we have connected because we had to. We have connected our hotlines. So all of that, all of that anonymous reporting and all of that, it is completely connected and talking to each other at our university. And that was because we paid $1.1 billion in damages for a disconnected, fall through the cracks, oh my gosh, what happened here situation with George Tyndall. We have our act together in that area. Other universities, hotlines all over the place. No, nothing's talking to each other. Our anonymous, our the number of anonymous calls that we're getting is the percentage of anonymity is very low at USC because people trust our process and are willing to talk to our investigators and provide their name because they know that it's easier for our investigators if we can get information from people and follow up, and they know that there's a confidentiality and that we'll maintain their confidentiality. Other universities, it's as high as like 80 some percent will call in anonymously because there's a fear of retribution or retaliation. We don't have that same experience at USC. So there's a complete trust in our process and our numbers are much higher. The numbers of people reporting in is very high, which is also really good. You want high numbers reporting. I used to run the hotline at the UN, and you want high numbers. That means people trust your process. It doesn't mean there's more problems happening. The same number of problems happen everywhere. It means more people are feeling good about reporting them, and that's where USC is so much better
That's
than
interesting. Yeah.
than the other
Yeah,
universities.
we've been burned by not reporting things in the past.
Yeah.
There were two questions that came up from the audience. The first is, do you know what coverages go into our captive?
The types of coverages I know generally, there's some malpractice
Heck,
on
yeah.
the CAC side.
Hmm.
Sexual harassment, there's some. I wouldn't say all of it. Um, so there's some of that, and I think there is some on the athletic side.
Hmm.
Um, I don't want to just say brain injury because I don't think that's the right way to say, but there's probably some overflow of that. Um,
There's a little bit of property, I think, and there was a little bit of casualty, including workers' compensation.
there
So,
probably is, and I don't know if there's any youth protection.
okay,
There may be certain things like, camps or
yeah.
'cause we have
Retentions on general liability, right?
yeah, those types of things. But we have a lot of youth on campus for
Right.
lots and lots and lots of different things. They may peel off certain programs of those and put those under the captive.
Okay.
But things where the insurance premiums are just outrageously high or have taken a big jump.
Yep.
That's probably going to be an area, or where the deductibles have taken a big jump.
Right.
Those are going to be areas where I think we're going to, and I'm guessing earthquake might be.
Yeah, there's some analysis that's being done there. We have 1 minute to go, and there was another question that came through the chat around we don't have a CRO. Do you believe we should?
I would be yes. I think the structure for a lot of our compliance audit, and a lot of these, ethics and all of that would be better suited reporting to a CRO, reporting directly into the president than how we have it structured right now, which is some in finance, some in HR, some in,
Yeah.
yeah, I think, but is it a burning platform has to be done today? I mean, that's how some universities have it structured. I think it's okay right now the way it is. It would be better. It would be a better governance structure to put it. It would be cleaner to put it all under a CRO.
Mhm.
Do I want that job? Not necessarily. So, do I want a new boss? Not necessarily. But would it be better under a CRO? I think the structure would be cleaner, and we get away from a lot of our reporting line issues and stuff. So yeah, I think we should have one.
Well, we've reached the end of our time. But Kiko, this has been a wonderful discussion. Thank you so very, very much. There was a lot on the table, a lot of open discussion about the things that are happening and not happening to some degree. And thank you, Jasmine, for being a partner in this exercise. And I'll see you in a few more minutes. As we close this one out, Robert Revelle is joining Jasmine and I in a few minutes as we talk about social inflation. Bob is the president of Predicat, which is one of the premier risk analytics organizations that recently joined the family, the analytic family at Moody's. And so, for those of you really interested in some of the newest thinking about emerging risks, stay tuned. So again, Kiko, it's been great. I'll see you Monday night on campus. And again, Jasmine, see you soon. As we go across, we'll start this up again at about 7:25.